for joining this week's GoErie live discussion. Today, Erie Times-News reporter David Bruce will be talking with Breanna Adams, Director of Environmental Health Services at the Erie County Department of Health, about water quality and safety of Lake Erie around Erie. I'm Erie Times-News online reporter Sarah Grabsky, and I'll be moderating your GoErie live comments today. Thanks to Gannon University for sponsoring these live discussions every week. Enjoy the conversation. David?
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. We are going to talk today about water quality, specifically about what you've probably been hearing a lot about, HABs, which are harmful algal blooms, and then also about levels of E. coli in Lake Erie waters, which has been tested for years and years. Very interesting subjects, things that have really caught a lot of attention in recent weeks. As you may have read in Sunday's Erie Times-News and on GoErie.com, there was a nationwide report from our parent company, Gatehouse Media, about water quality at beaches along both coasts of the United States and here in the Great Lakes region. But we're going to talk specifically about Lake Erie waters, Presque Isle Bay, perhaps some other bodies of water in Erie County. Breanna, thank you very much for agreeing to appear on this Facebook Live.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with some of the basics. We are talking about two different measurements of water quality. We're talking about harmful algal blooms, and we're talking about levels of E. coli, a bacteria. Let's talk a little bit about the differences between the two and what are they measuring? What are they indicative of?
Sure. So I can start with our E. coli sampling. Erie County Department of Health tests beaches along Presque Isle and Freeport Beach each weekly to look for those E. coli counts. We use that as part of a federal grant for beach monitoring, and we use that as an indicator for other bacteria that may be in the water to determine if the water is safe for you to be swimming in or not.
So it's not necessarily that the E. coli is the bacteria that would make people ill, though it could.
It could.
But it is a marker. If there are high levels of E. coli in the water, it's very likely that there are high levels of other E. coli or other bacteria that are more likely to make folks sick.
Absolutely, there could be. And so that's why we worked out an advisory and restriction levels so that we can let people know what that risk might be.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about that before we get to the harmful algal blooms. It's been for years, folks say, oh, the beach is closed because of high bacteria levels. There's no beaches being closed. People can still go to Beach 6 or Beach 1, even if there are high levels of bacteria. It's a swim advisory or a swim restriction.
Yes.
And let's talk a little bit about what the differences are.
Sure. So at a lower level of E. coli, we would issue a swim advisory. And so that's asking for people who might have cuts on their arms or legs, might have been sick or be immunocompromised, for small children or pregnant women, so that they're not swimming in those waters because there's enough bacteria there that it could make them sick. But if they're perfectly healthy, then it probably wouldn't happen at those levels. So it's just that advisory, that knowledge that, there's some bacteria here, there's always some bacteria here, but just a slightly elevated level at that point.
Yeah. What kind of year have we had as far as E. coli? We'll get to HABs in just a little bit.
Sure.
But how many, roughly how many times has there been a beach advisory posted? How many times has there been a beach restriction posted so far in this swimming season?
We've had a great year this swimming season. We test from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and so far, only at the beginning of July, we had 5 advisories and 1 restriction.
That was all basically one day, correct?
It was one day.
July 8th, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then it was lifted immediately the next day. There was 1 other advisory the following week, too, but also lifted a couple days later, I believe. So
it's been a really good season. Do you have any theories or ideas why? The previous year, we saw a lot of last 2 years, 2017 and 2018, we saw, I think, 55 total advisories between 2017 and 2018 combined. Beach 11, swimming was restricted, I think, for the last month of the swim season. Do we have any idea why we're seeing much lower levels of E. coli so far in 2019?
We don't. So okay. The water, the waves are a moving target, and so is the E. coli. So we don't know. We can't pinpoint any one reason, temperature or wave height or wind or rain, that would stir it up enough to issue those advisories and restrictions as hard as we've tried to. But we don't have any kind of indication as why we've had a better season this year so far.
Okay. Now, the folks at Presque Isle State Park, I was able to interview them a little bit by email last week, and they have taken measures at Beach 11 to try to prevent the long-term swim restrictions that they saw in 2018, which includes putting up some sort of fencing, and I'm trying to get a little bit more information from them on that at Beach 11, and also setting off pyrotechnics, which kind of surprised me to hear about that. But were you surprised to learn that DCNR, that's the statewide agency that runs the park, that they were setting off fireworks to scare off the geese on Beach 11?
They definitely needed some goose control measures. There's always been a large goose population there, but I am not familiar with any of the techniques that they've been using. So
we're working to try to get some more information on that, because I would love to be out there if they're doing that and see that. But apparently it's working, because Beach 11 has had, I think, one advisory for one day all summer. So
yes.
The short message is, the water at Presque Isle beaches so far in 2019 have been safe to swim, except for 5 of the beaches had an advisory for one day on July 8th, and 1 beach had an advisory or restriction
July 11th.
For July 11th. Since then, it's been great.
Yes.
Let's go to HABs, which again are harmful algal blooms.
Sure.
Breanna, if you can tell me a little bit about that, and how is that different than E. coli?
So harmful algal blooms are naturally occurring. They occur in all types of bodies of water, and it's an algae made of bacteria, but the problem is that it could produce toxins, which could then make us sick. There aren't hard regulations the way that there are for E. coli, but Erie's been very proactive in making a harmful algal bloom task force, and so that group has done a lot of research, worked with national agencies to put levels in and a testing protocol so that we're able to advise people when those levels are so high, or when there could be some risk to them or their family members.
Are HABs more dangerous than higher levels of E. coli? Is one more dangerous than the other to folks' health if they come in contact with it? Or is it basically it's problematic either way?
I think that they're problematic either way, so they would present a little bit differently, different kinds of illness, but they're both problematic, but not. We don't ever want them to stop someone from going into the water. Like, maybe you won't go into the water right in that area where it's posted, but we're so lucky here to have so many beaches, so many points of access to get into and utilize every day.
Now, while it's been a great summer for the E. coli levels, they've been very low in the safe zone almost exclusively all summer. We have seen lots of advisories for E. coli levels. In fact, I'm going to show you in a second some of the locations around the peninsula, and they're different. They test for HABs in a lot of different spots, not just at the guarded beaches like they do for E. coli. I'll grab that for a second.
You said E. coli.
Oh, I'm sorry, for HABs.
Yes, you're talking about HABs right
HABs.
now.
See, even I get confused, and we want to make sure we're straight on this. So I have here a map, and Breanna, if you want to take a look too, here's a map of the peninsula, and right here along the guarded beaches is where they basically test for E. coli, right offshore on Beach 1, Beach 6, Beach 11. HABs, there are tests being done at the beaches, but also on the bayside, almost anywhere where people might come in contact with the water, or, as we've been learning with this, dogs, where people let their dogs swim in the bay, including, and I'll bring it up here, I don't have my glasses on, but one of the more interesting spots is right around here, and forgive me for not having it exactly, it gets a little blurry as I call it up. There was an interesting HAB advisory last week that was not for dog swimming. It was
a recreational advisory.
That was the first one we've seen, I believe, in 2 years. What is that, a recreational advisory for harmful algal blooms, and how does that differ from the dog swimming advisory for harmful algal blooms?
Sure. So the dog threshold for harmful algal blooms is very low, because dogs are using the water differently than humans are, right? They're drinking it as they're swimming, they're licking their fur. So that threshold's very low. That's why we do have a lot of dog warnings. For the recreational advisory, the level of toxin that was found was higher, and then so it's asking people, not to be in the water swimming, playing around, because the risk is that if they're inhaling that toxin, it could affect their lungs and their respiratory a little bit, or it could affect their skin and they could have a rash or some type of reaction to those toxins.
So when there's this kind of advisory, a recreational advisory due to HABs, people need to avoid any contact with the water at that specific location, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And we will track that. We post that on GoErie.com shortly after the tests are published on I believe it is both the county health website, the health department website, and does the Regional Science Consortium still publish them as well?
Yes, and we keep an active Google map that has all of those, all results all together. So it has the E. coli results as well as the harmful algal bloom results from our test each week, that we keep that updated and available for anybody to see.
And that is
ecdh.org is our website.
And then you click on environmental, and then you click on
beaches.
Beaches, and you should be able to get to there. They update it usually late on Thursday or early on Friday, and it's a great way to know what beaches are safe for swimming and what places have high levels of harmful algal blooms. Some of the sites that have had high levels of HABs much of the summer have been around Perry Monument, Boaters Beach, as we said, also the Presque Isle Ferry slip, and then also some places it's not all just the peninsula. There have been other locations around the county as well, but a great site is that one off the health department's website.
Right. We do test all the way for harmful algal blooms. We do have spots entirely along the lake shore. So we're testing from Freeport Beach in Northeast all the way to Elk Creek. And in addition to updating that map and updating our media partners, then we do also physically post signs in those locations. So if there's a sign in that location, it has like a red border, normally a dog on it, it would say, there's an advisory. And so that means that has been posted for that week.
Okay. This is relatively new for folks, learning about HABs, and there's been a lot of talk about it. I know it has been a big concern in the western part of Lake Erie for years. Is this something that has been a growing concern? Is this something that we're going to have to deal with every summer from now on? And do we know what the causes are for this?
We're learning more about the causes, so it is naturally occurring. We know that nutrients can load into the lake. They come through the streams, through our stormwater, and sometimes then with the warmer temperatures and just the way that it mixes, then those harmful algal blooms can bloom more. I do think that it will continue to be an issue, but luckily the task force has really great partners with the Regional Science Consortium, who physically does the testing, with DCNR on the park, and Sea Grant, and local universities who are able to do some extra research and really see, what can we do to maybe prevent these in the future. Okay.
Is there any... Oh, Sarah, I think, has a question.
What are some common misconceptions that you see often about harmful algal blooms? There's a lot of, I think, people who just assume something about them.
Sure. So a few things that we've had to work really hard to try to bring public are things like sometimes you'll see the algae there, right? Like sometimes you can tell that you don't want to go into the water. Other times the water would look clear, but the sign's posted, and those toxins can last after the algae is not there, and that's what we're really testing for. Another thing is that, if you're suspicious of a bloom, if you see something maybe by your boat or your dock, then you can call the Regional Science Consortium or Erie County Department of Health, report that bloom, and it would get on the testing round for that week.
Is there a certain number they need to call, or do they call the health department's main number?
They could call the health department main number, which is 814-451-6700.
And there are different types of life on that float on the top of the bay and on the lake. They're not all necessarily, if you see something on the top, it's not necessarily a harmful algal bloom. Right. It can be something else. Is there any distinctive appearances that folks need to be concerned about?
A lot of the times it could look, it's called the blue-green algae, so it might look even like spilled paint or spilled, or like pea soup sometimes. There is a new feature at, sometimes at the Tom Ridge Center and through the Regional Science Consortium. It's called the HAB Lab. And so they're really working to take that out into the community, and it has examples of what some algae looks like compared to other life that could be in the water.
So there's efforts out to teach folks between a bloom that could be a health risk and those that are just benign, that don't pose a threat.
Absolutely.
Okay, and is that mostly at the Trek that folks can find that, or are they taking that out to events? And
they're working on some different public events. I know they were at Discover Presque Isle last weekend and just trying to get it set up and out there for people to see.
So the takeaway from this, whether we're talking about E. coli levels or we're talking about HABs, I mean, it's not a reason, and we were discussing this right before we came on. There's a viral photo going around town of a young man lifting up his shirt and showing a pretty nasty skin rash. And the written part of the post says that, avoid Erie beaches, avoid creeks in the area. The Erie beaches are very safe right now. I mean, we're seeing very low levels. This post kind of concerns you for some inaccuracies. Maybe we can elaborate on that. Should people just avoid swimming at all and avoid contact with any part of the bay or the lake?
No, absolutely not. Like, we've enjoyed the lake for so long, and we're not here to scare anybody. We're not here to take that away. But what we do want is to be aware of those things, right? So the places that we are testing are guarded, permitted beaches, and those are along Presque Isle, that's Freeport Beach, and Edinburgh Lake is also responsible for their testing. They're all public access points. We're testing for E. coli, we're looking for HABs there as well, but other places that people could choose to swim, like a creek or a boat launch or something like that, is not necessarily a permitted area, and so we don't have those same kind of testing protocol in place for those areas.
If you want to reduce your risk of having an infection, and we don't even know with that viral photo if that was an infection from actually swimming in the lake. There's some other things that could have played a role. But you want to go to a guarded beach. You not only know that it's guarded with a lifeguard, but that water has been tested recently, once a week. Mm-hmm. And that's if the numbers are good. If the numbers are high, it gets retested within 24 hours.
Presque Isle, actually, we do the regulatory samples are taken 2 days a week.
Oh, 2 days a week. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Brianna, we have a question. What should you look for, and I don't know if you know this, what are some things to look for after being exposed? If you think, or you were there hours before you did the advisory, what are some
We could start
symptoms?
maybe with the skin symptoms and then maybe into the GI symptoms.
Sure. So a lot of the times if a dog is exposed to a harmful algal bloom, then they could be having some vomiting, diarrheal, or just be very lethargic, I believe is what's been presented in animals. For humans, what we have seen is some skin irritation, right? So maybe some red, maybe just a general irritation, and depending on, again, how they were recreating, if they were drinking some of the water, breathing it in, maybe some respiratory issues would be like the first things to start.
And usually that can happen fairly soon after your exposure to the water. And certain people are more at risk of this, aren't they, than others? Folks with cuts or issues with their skin, folks who have compromised immune systems, whether because they're older or whether because they're taking medication, such as maybe some chemotherapy or something like that. Folks with healthy immune systems that don't have cuts on their skin are at even a lower risk, even if they are exposed, correct?
That's my understanding,
Okay.
yes.
Okay. I think, do we have any other questions from online?
No. One question that I've seen asked before on our Facebook feed is a lot of people wonder how much water, would someone need to, it's not like, oh, my toddler got a little water in her mouth, or, is she going to get E. coli? Like, how much, can you kind of talk about, like, how much exposure someone would need to probably present symptoms?
Or
do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I don't know that there's a real specific number for that,
Yeah.
right? Because the water fluctuates every day, and as we're testing, if we're seeing different levels, then that's where that barrier is, right? So when there's restrictions, then the water has so much bacteria that we can't guarantee that even a healthy person wouldn't get sick there. So it just kind of depends on those levels. Again, if there's an advisory, I would not try to drink any of the water, of course. But just keeping those safe practices, right? Not going in with cuts or wounds, trying to keep your head above the water, or not drinking it in or anything like that on purpose.
Another question we had, is there anything that you and I can do to help prevent harmful algal blooms or bacteria in the water?
Absolutely. So a few things that we can do just as community members to help is make sure things like our septic systems aren't malfunctioning, right? So if your septic system's malfunctioning, it's probably getting into a waterway and then eventually into our lake and our bay. That's a form of E. coli. If there are some of the things that lead to harmful algal blooms are that nutrient runoff. So being aware of things like fertilizing your lawn right before a rainstorm, or washing your car over a storm drain, something like that is just washing again those nutrients right away. Everything that we are doing on our sidewalk and our storm drains is ending up in the bay and the lake. So as much as we can protect that, then that's helpful.
Another question.
Sure.
Sorry,
That's okay.
Fire. How many people, or have you gotten any reports of anyone getting sick so far in Erie this summer?
We have not.
Okay.
So once again, if you want to stay in tune of if the waters are safe, the best places are, we'll have reports on GoErie.com and in the Erie Times-News, but you want to go to the Erie County Department of Health's website, which is ecdh.org. You want to click on environmental health, and then click on beaches, and you'll have an up-to-date report. Especially, it is updated on HABs late on Thursdays, early on Fridays. You'll also just want to see for any signs at the beaches or the other locations you want to go to. But there is certainly good news to be had for safe water in Erie County, especially as far as E. coli is concerned. Breanna, anything else you want to add that we haven't discussed here?
No, just that these are all out there for the public to know about, right? And so we don't, again, ever want to stop you from being in the water, enjoying everything that Erie has to offer, but just being aware of those physical signs and what to look for.
Excellent.
Thanks to everyone who joined in and participated in this week's GoErie live discussion. This video will be available for replay on the GoErie Facebook page and on the GoErie homepage. Thanks again to Gannon University for sponsoring this discussion, and to Breanna Adams, Director of Environmental Health Services at the Erie County Department of Health, for joining us today. You can find upcoming topics and guests on the GoErie Facebook page each week. Thanks so much for listening.